This is going to be a video that talks through the material in Chapter 4, reviewing the literature. In order to make sense out of what a literature review should look like, I first want to take you back all the way to your senior year of high school. So if you will, get that senior yearbook shot photo in your mind there, and think about one of the things that's kind of like a rite of passage for all high school seniors, which is writing that senior English research paper. Your experience with writing the senior English research paper may be like this young man, the frustration, the thinking through what the topic is going to be, or even thinking through how to get those first words on paper. For a lot of people, the senior English research paper is represented by the index cards. You may remember the big brown envelope of all kinds of cards. There were note cards and source cards and bib cards and all kinds of stuff. And so for some people, they remember that process by thinking through index cards. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what a review of literature is, and the way I view it is it's like these layers of a layered cake. And so that's going to be the backdrop for this definition that we're going to build about the review of literature. And ultimately, the review of literature at the very top surface is not so different than that senior English research paper. And so you think through that you had a topic that either you chose or was assigned to you, and then you went to the library and you began finding articles that were related to your topic. And so whether you did that during the computer days or prior to the computer days, the actual card catalog days, you went and searched for all kinds of writings that were about your topic. You then began to pull all those things together in one paper, but it was built on the writings of other people where you're reviewing what they were saying. And so if you think through that process of the senior English research paper, a review of literature at the very first service is not so different. But a review of literature in a scholarly academic sense goes deeper than just that senior English research paper. This review of literature, you'll now notice, is the second layer. It's a research paper, yes, but it uses primary sources from peer-reviewed publications. And right there, with just one level deeper, we've probably deviated from what's required of most high school seniors with their English research paper. When we say that it uses primary sources, we mean that we are using articles, whether they're journal articles, it could be books or other publications, but oftentimes in an academic setting it is journal articles. And these primary sources are the author's writings where the author was actually the researcher. In other words, the researcher conducted original research and then wrote an article about that. So a secondary source, by contrast, would be where a person was writing about someone else's study. They're going back and looking at what some other researcher did and then giving a summary or paraphrase of that. That would be a secondary source. That person is writing from the perspective of one step removed from the original research. This primary source is where the author is the researcher. And later on I'll show you some ways to certainly differentiate between what looks like a primary source and what a secondary source looks like. But this review of literature is going back to use primary sources. Now, interestingly enough, if you think about it, the literature review itself would be then a secondary source because you would be one step removed from the original research. And we're using sources from peer-reviewed publications. These are going to be journals who use an editorial board. The editorial board would be made up of people who are experts in the field, and what they're doing is looking at different people's submissions, their manuscripts, and deciding which ones actually get to make it into their journal. So that would be said that it's peer-reviewed. So a group of peers, scholarly peers, are reviewing those manuscripts, and only the most solid research studies actually make it into their journal. What that lets you as a graduate student know is if you find an article in a peer-reviewed journal, then you know that it's already kind of been vetted and it's going to be really good solid research. If it's not in a peer-reviewed journal, then you're on your own to decide whether or not the research was solid. And so we really like to see these great primary sources where the author was the researcher and peer-reviewed publications, so we know that we've got good research. Let's go one layer deeper. A review of literature is a research paper using primary sources from peer-reviewed publications. It consists of summaries of related studies linked together. And so what we're going to do is, say let's find, if we found 15 articles, 15 research studies about our topic. We would then summarize each of those 15 studies and then link them together in a very coherent sense, and that would be the paper. That research paper is one summary after another, and that's building that review of literature. The review of literature goes, though, one level deeper than that. The review of literature has to consist of these summaries of related studies linked together, but in a certain order. It's a logical, coherent order. It goes from general to specific and from theoretical to empirical. And so if we found, again, those 15 great articles that we were going to include in our review of literature, we would not just put them in any kind of random order. Instead, I suggest to students that you take all 15 articles and lay them out on your dining room table, and then begin to decide what makes the most sense as I'm telling my story in my literature review. Where would I begin, and where do I want this thing to end? Which article should I start with? Which article should come second, third, all the way down to that final article? And we have some guidelines that help. One thing is we would start out with the articles that are more general in nature or scope, and we work our way down to those that are more specific. The other idea is we would go from articles that are more theoretical. That's kind of where the author is thinking through theory in that particular topic, versus the empirical. The empirical research is like the hands-on, down and dirty, the nitty-gritty research. That's where the author, who again is the researcher, has actually collected some data from a sample, a group of participants, and is writing about that exact study. That was hands-on research that they conducted. We would want those to come at the end. And finally, there's one more level to a good review of literature. It has to build support for your study and ground it solidly, again, in the research. And so what that means is as you build the review of literature, you're ultimately kind of like building your case, almost like a good lawyer who's delivering, the opening statement or maybe the closing argument, that as you work your way through looking at what's out there, you have to ultimately give that there's some kind of support for why you would be doing your study. The review of literature is one of the first pieces to conducting original research. And so what it does for the reader is it lets the reader know there is some gap out there. There is some dimension to this topic that no one's really looked at yet. And then that allows you as the researcher to say, and that's why I'm doing my study. And so that ultimately builds that support. The capstone project that our MAED students would write would probably stop at about that level. And so what we would expect in that capstone review of literature would be a research paper using primary sources, good, solid, peer-reviewed publications, summaries of those studies linked together in a very specific way so that it's logical and coherent. For example, our EDD students who are then going to be using the Lit Review as the springboard for their own dissertation, their own study, they would go that one level deeper. We would expect to read their review of literature and then in the end have this sense of feeling like, oh my goodness, how on earth are we going to resolve this issue that's been presented, this gap or this lack of information on this one specific topic. And so it kind of builds the idea for what is the upcoming study. So that's the review of literature, the 5 layers of that. You can see it starts out being not so different from the high school senior English research paper, but it very quickly takes a turn into a more scholarly and academic type publication, and it goes all through those 5 layers.